All right. Okay.
Oh,
Got it. All
thank
right.
you.
Okay, I'll get started then. And yeah, no pressure. I gotta zoom through all this. So for I think for your group, a lot of people are going to be familiar with a lot of the best management practices because some of them it's based on best practices that we already do. Um, but this document was put together for North America because there is inconsistency. Um, so I guess I thought I would go through all the best management practices so everyone knows kind of what we're all kind of agreed on. So hopefully, if you're new to it, then you're going to learn lots. If you're not new to it, you're just going to be confirming that maybe you're saying the right things to people when they're asking you questions about bat houses. Yeah, so I'm the primary author on this, but I was really the stick handler. The report was written by a committee, and then I inherited it. And then it was actually supposed to be best management practices, and it was really more of a literature review. So then I ended up manipulating the document into its current format. So it's a very long document. I think it's like 180 pages. But yeah. So I'm only focusing on a part of it today. So, and it was just released officially in September 2023, and it's available. I guess you can maybe send around the link. It's available on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service website. All right. So yeah, so the players in the game were the Wildlife Conservation Society Canada. Dr. Corey Lawson received the funding for this document. It was part of an agreement when she got funding to support her graduate student who was working on bat houses in the Okanagan. That was Sue Dulk's project. So this was one of the things that they promised to come up with was a set of best management practices for bat houses. So yes, I'm with the Alberta Community Bat Program, and we do a lot of bat house work here. And I've written a lot of best management practice stuff for British Columbia. And so I ended up with the task of creating this document in a best management practice format. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service were the primary funders and have been interested in this document. Their white nose syndrome response team is stick handling, hanging it on the web, and we're continuing to work with them. And we're going to put together a 3 to 4 page summary of the document too. So look for that in 2024. The University of Illinois and Thompson River University, there was graduate students from both of those places, as well as a few professors who are deep into the biology of bats using bat houses, and they contributed to the document. Jordy Seegers from the Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative is involved in the review. And we have biologists from Environment and Climate Change Canada who are also involved. So a lot of people. So like I said, the document's about 180 pages long, but you don't have to read the whole thing. I always tell people to look for the bits that are of interest to you. I'm going to focus on sections 2 and 3, which are the sections that identify the issues and the actual best management practices. But if you're interested in looking at what future research you should be doing, or some of the reporting, which is what and recording of counts and stuff, those processes are outlined in sections 4 and 5. The audience for this document is pretty varied. It can go from people who are bat biologists to government biologists to land managers to people who really don't know anything about bats. So we included a glossary so that people could understand some of the language. And then the appendices are quite long because that was a lot of the literature review. It has a really long literature cited section. So there's a lot of this document that are pieces that you might want to look at. So yeah, the first appendice is actually a really good literature review of bat roosting ecology and physiology and the use of bat houses and some of the history of the development of bat house design. The second appendices is a list of the bat species in Canada and the US with the types of roosts they use, because you might, depending on who's using this document, they may want to look at a different species of bats than the ones that we focused on in this document. And I would say that any bat that uses trees or has a history of using buildings in some way might use a bat house. We just don't really know for a lot of species. And there's a lot of bats in between Canada and the US. There's a lot of different species. They're up about 50. So then we have section 3 is the species accounts for the little brown, Yuma, and big brown bat, which were the focus of this document. I just thought that was important to include. There's a short summary of bat species thermal preferences and tolerances from the literature, which is kind of useful when you're thinking about sort of what's the limits that bats can tolerate in a bat house. Then there's the roost monitoring programs, the protocols that, of course, we use in British Columbia and Alberta. And so that it's really for across North America. If other people wanted to do this, they can maybe standardize their protocols. Sue Dulk added a little section from her thesis, some unpublished data comparing buildings and bat boxes. And then the last appendice is from NATE, the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology. They had a little project where they designed an innovative bat box. So there's, and you're going to see more of that in the future. There's different people who are, using different types of materials and different designs to try to deal with some of the temperature extremes that we're experiencing with our bat houses. So why the bat house BMPs? Well, there's a lot of public interest in bat houses, and you guys probably know about that because you probably get lots of questions. And there's a lot of misinformation. So we wanted to make sure that we kind of put out some truths out there. There was a concern for bat safety with some of the designs maybe not being so great for bats, especially with overheating events. And there was a need to convey that bat houses have a place in bat conservation, but they're not the answer to all conservation problems. So yeah, bat houses aren't the answer for all bat species, but they can be useful. And there was no standard designs and little guidance out there. So the first part of the introduction talks about really just what is a bat house. And we use the title bat house to encompass everything, but within bat houses, you have bat boxes, you have bat condos, and then you can have arrays of bat houses or bat boxes. And so there's mini condos and the big bat condos. So you guys are probably familiar with that too. And for this paper, we did focus on little browns, Yumas, and big brown bats. And Appendix 2 really has that complete list if you are looking for information on other species. Some of the other bats that we do know use bat houses, they may need really unique or specific design features. And I expect in the future that maybe people come up with sort of additions to this document that talk about like Mexican free-tailed bats or Florida bonneted bats or Townsend's big-eared bats and how they have specific needs. This was sort of more of a general approach. And I think a lot of the physiology discussion and some of the general practices that we suggest probably are fairly universal, but design may be really specific. So yeah, so size, design, color, placement, that influences the microclimatic conditions in a bat house. And so those are some of the standards that we wanted to address. Also considering the site position where you install a bat house, your local climate, and other features that you need to consider to determine which best practices to implement for your site. We wanted to flag issues to help bat house managers understand what's appropriate to support successful bat colonies. So here are the issues. This is section 2. So we came up with 12. First was basically looking at threats from human activities. And so that includes the exterminations and exclusions, habitat loss and degradation, disturbances at colony sites, and other human-caused threats like light, noise, air quality, or entrapment. The second issue is looking at white nose syndrome and how we can support populations who are recovering from losses from white nose. The third was the thermal suitability of artificial roofs. And again, that goes back to design, color, placement, and the number of bat houses. The suitable capacity of bat houses to accommodate bat colonies. Sometimes you can get bat houses that are too full. So it's like keeping an eye on that and understanding that you need maybe more than one bat house for a colony. The suitability of materials and the design features for a bat house. Not all materials are good. Access for bats. There's different design features that provide different types of access. And then considering predators at bat roosts. Sometimes we put stuff up and we don't really consider that we might be just setting out a dining table. So that's important to consider. Site suitability. You might not want to put bat houses in an industrial park. So it's like thinking about placement. The use of bat houses, whether it's for mitigation or for other purposes. There's some best practices for troubleshooting if you have problems at your bat house. We covered that in sort of a small section. We looked at human health and safety, and then best practices for mitigation. Oops, did I put ahead? I can't see the bottom of I've got this stupid bar at the bottom. Can I move this there? Okay. So yes, the BMPs. Uh-oh, we're not loading. What have I done? Oh yeah, so here I'm going to go through each of those issues, and we'll talk about the best practices that are related to each of those issues. So the first one was the threats from human activities. And of course, we've got the best practices that BC and Alberta both, I think, have been leaders in this in producing best practices for pest or wildlife control operators in the management of bats in buildings. And those are things that we will direct people to because I think those are really great resources. And they're pretty universal. And it's really focused on avoiding exclusions during the nursery period. And that will vary depending on where you are on the continent. So, and a lot of those best practices say, consult with a local bat person to figure out what your timing window is where you should avoid exclusions. And of course, I should note too that we're still in developing the online training course for best management practices for wildlife control operators. And that should be available by the end of March 2024. Habitat loss, degradation, pretty standard, conserving natural roosting habitat and wetlands for foraging and drinking. So that's just, we have those are pretty standard practices. And hibernation habitat in particular, identification of that type of habitat and protection, that's also pretty standard. So the other ones that are kind of unique are, assessing entrapment hazards. Things like rain barrels and buckets and watering troughs or other types of traps like that can exist for bats. Anything that's of depth and has smooth sides where bats can't climb out can be an entrapment hazard. A lot of the times the practices are to just basically cover those features, turn buckets upside down, or provide some type of escape terrain, whether that's a frog log or a material that is draped over the side of a bucket or a rain barrel, or just putting in like a stick or something that they can use to climb out of. But people just don't think of that, and then you hear it and you go, "Oh yeah, of course I can do that. That's not a problem." But it's just kind of flagging these issues. Noise. So noise can be an issue for colonies. It's really variable because sometimes bat colonies will live in a really noisy place. It depends if they've been there for a long time, they may tolerate noise. But if it's like a new noise, it may cause a colony to abandon a site. So it's like, what kind of noise and how loud? So we went with an estimate is really, they can hear our audible noises, but also that high frequency sound. So 10 kilohertz is still in our hearing range. up to 100 kilohertz, which is really high frequency sound that we can't hear, and 80 decibels or louder. There wasn't a example from California. There was a person who they figured that a colony had vacated a site after some construction equipment had been put up, and it wasn't making any noises to people, but it was making really high frequency and very loud noise, and they figured that's what caused the colony to leave. And the local, when even the people who were doing the assessments, it didn't tweak with them to think, oh, this is making this equipment that they just put up is making high frequency sound, but it can be an issue. So lighting, we talk about lighting more often now, basically avoiding pointing it at roost access points and minimize the light intensity, keeping areas dark where you can, focusing task lighting, and there's different types of designs for lights now that think about dark skies and direct the light downwards and focus it, avoiding white and blue-white light or UV spectrum lights, because those are the ones most likely to attract insects. And adaptive lighting strategies such as timers and motion sensors are pretty standard now. Dust and smoke or air quality issues. Sometimes we don't think about those, but you should, if there's always somebody burning something to the west, I mean, you might not be a good place to put a bat house, or beside a road that gets really dusty midsummer and it kicks up a lot of dust. You should be thinking of those air quality issues for bats as well. The BMPs around white nose syndrome, those are also fairly standard these days now. I mean, I think we are thinking about those things, but it's just being aware of decontamination protocols and using those when they're appropriate. Not applying guano to bat houses. Sometimes people think that's a way to encourage bats into a bat house, but we shouldn't really be spreading guano around, because the spores of white nose that cause white nose syndrome, that fungus, can be carried in the bat guano, so we don't want to spread that around. Just being aware of that potential of disease spread through those fungal spores. The third issue around thermal suitability. So it's bigger is better. Bigger, more chambers, gives you more variation in the microclimate within bat boxes. 4 seems to be sort of the minimum, really. I know people put a lot of 2-chamber boxes up, but I know Corey Olson here has experimented with temperature and humidity in boxes, and he said even the 5-chamber boxes almost never overheat in the back chamber. So it's like the bigger ones are better, and that goes for the rocket boxes or the nursery boxes, that standard BCI box. And that's sort of the minimum size, is that BCI standard nursery box. Color is going to influence your thermal characteristics within the roost. So again, darker is warmer, lighter is cooler. And you got to be aware of like where you are. So both latitude and local microclimates can influence what you're going to experience at a particular site. We have sites that are far north in Canada that have overheated because they're just in the perfect little microclimate at that site. Just because you're up north doesn't mean it's cold all the time. So depending on the time of season, you can still have overheating, and you should be aware of that. Shading bat boxes, you guys have probably experienced that in the Okanagan, where during those heat domes and stuff, we've had to people have just been experimenting with different types of shading, but putting up little canopies or installing those extra large roofs on bat boxes can produce shading that can just drop at a couple of degrees, and that sometimes is enough to keep the bats safe for that. Usually it's a short period of time where you get those extreme temperatures. And bat house placement to ensure suitability. So you have to, this is where the concept of a roost area, and this is important, and this is something that I think is maybe a sort of a new concept in a way for a lot of people, is to tell people, you don't just want to put a single bat box. You really do need a group of bat boxes either in an array or set around your property or in your close by in your community, because that colony, as it experiences different conditions over the season, may need to move to meet their needs. And if they don't have options, then they have nowhere to go, and you could be putting those bats at risk. So you might use a combination of different types of bat houses, different designs, or a combination of different colors of bat houses, even in a small area. Just any way to kind of offer a variety of microclimates for a particular colony in a particular roost area. And just I'm going to go through roost area, that concept. The whole idea of it's called the fission fusion model for colonies, that they've studied bats in forest conditions and found that you might have a colony of bats, and here we have roost trees A, B, and C. And so at one point, all the bats might be just in one tree. They might have 3 main trees. And they start on night 1, everybody's in roost A. And then in the second night, they move over to all 3 trees. They split up. So you'll have a bat in roost B, 3 of them in A, and then 1 in C, or 2 of them in C. And so they can use up to 20 or 30 different trees in a roost area, but they might have like 2 or 3 main roosts. So here we're just looking at the 3 main roosts, but over a summer, you could have these bats moving throughout the roost area to different sites. And what you want to think about, I think they all go, so the 3rd night, they all go back to their original roost. Like, you don't know what bats are going to do. They're just going to, whatever they need to do, that's what they'll do. And we don't really understand what rules they're following. But for bat houses, you got to think of it in the same way, is that it's not just trees. We're modeling our bat houses based on a tree roost. These are tree roosting bats. So they're going to follow the same sort of behavioral pattern, but they might be using bat boxes and trees. They might be using buildings and bat boxes and trees. Their roost area might have multiple sites within an area. So when you're thinking about bat houses, think about roost areas. So placement, this is the other thing that we always get asked about. I'm sure you get questions about this too. People always want to put bat houses on trees. Well, trees can work, but you want to avoid trees that offer too much shade, because it can make them too cold and you'll never get a maternity colony here. Here's a bat box that's on a tree. This one actually did get bats in it, but not a maternity colony. It had a couple of males in it. I think it was a little bit shady. This is also a single chamber box in it, so it wasn't a great box. But this is a better tree in that it doesn't have a lot of limbs on it. So that's what you're kind of looking for, is if you do use a tree that looks more like a giant post versus a big branched out tree. And you should also be looking for if there's sites for predators, like perching sites. So you might want to avoid that kind of a tree as well. And you also don't want to block flight paths for bats that are accessing a box. So trees are not always the best. Buildings offer sort of ideal conditions because the building itself absorbs heat over the day and can release that heat back to the bat house. And I think that's why we often have the most success with bat houses on buildings, because they have more stable, warm temperatures over the nighttime period. Again, height is 3 to 5 meters to the bottom of the box, and you got to make sure that it's securely attached. And poles. So yeah, people are putting bat houses on poles more often these days. You have the most flexibility when they're on a pole, because you can adjust the height, the orientation, or the location. And I think back-to-back boxes are probably a better idea than a single box on a pole, just because you get more of a mass of the bat houses on the top of the pole, and that mass of wood can absorb more heat over the daytime, and then again you've got a more stable thermal mass. Interestingly, I had read that because you're on a pole and you're out in the open, you might have a cooler conditions on in a bat house on a pole, just from convective cooling, like from wind blowing past the bat house. But that at the bat meetings in Winnipeg, one of the people there, they were presenting about bat houses on poles, and they thought that poles were hotter. So I don't know. I think we still have to keep an eye on some of the research that's going on, just to understand what is going on in some of these bat house designs in these different locations. Orientation is really important. They used to always just say paint them black and put them on a south-facing wall. Well, we know now that's really, really hot. Maternity boxes, east facing seems to be the most ideal, and that's because the coldest part of the day is the early morning, and so east facing picks up that early morning sun and warms up the bat house. So I think that's why the females are choosing those east facing aspects. But other warm aspects like south can be used by bats. And again, it may really vary depending on what part of the season that you're looking at. So they may move from a south-facing, a really warm box that they use early in the spring because that's the warmest thing they can find, to moving to an east-facing box by midsummer when it starts getting hot, and the east-facing box might be just a tad cooler in the middle of the day for them. So yeah, colonies may shift boxes, and that's another reason for having sort of a roost area approach for bat boxes. And my general rule is to keep them within 100 meters of each other. Bat babies, when they're born, can be up to a third of the mother's body weight. So quickly, by the middle of summer, the mass of that pup is huge. So those moms really don't want to be flying too far. So they will fly farther than that in natural settings. We do know from radio telemetry work that the mother bats are flying with these big babies. But just to be nice, I always just say within 100 meters is probably making it easier for those mothers to move their pups. For males or non-reproductive females, or the non-maternity colonies, they might be favoring west-facing boxes, and this is true for bats after the pups fledge, and these animals might be moving from their summer to their winter roosting habitat, so they're in transition. They may favor west-facing boxes, and that's because west-facing boxes may be cooler during the daytime, so they can use torpor, and then they can use the warmth of the sun in the late afternoon to warm themselves up. They don't have to expend any energy, and that can get them ready for hunting as the sun sets. So they're always looking for ways to save a little energy. So again, when you set up your roost area, you might set up a few boxes just for males, or for bats that might be moving between summer and winter roosting habitats. So that's another thing to consider.
Susan, just wanted to let you know we're at almost 5 minutes left till we get cut off. So just to let everybody know, you just have to log back into the same link.
I thought this would go faster. I'm sorry. Yeah. So
Okay.
yeah, I'll log back in because I'm only in issue 4. The last few go a little faster, but those are the sort of the bigger ones. Okay, so I'll just keep going, and if I get cut off, I'll log back in.
Yeah, I'll just go like this when we've got like 5 seconds left.
Okay, cool. Oh, that's just telling me 4 minutes and 49 seconds left. Okay. Whew, okay. So the 4th issue was around capacity of bat houses to accommodate bat colonies. So that's looking at the number of bat houses. And you'll know from doing bat counts just how big your colony is. So you'll need to know how many bat houses basically you need based on the size of your bat houses that you have up. But yeah, just consider capacity, so there's enough space for that colony. They shouldn't be stuffed into a box. And again, you might need to consider, again, the local